Hello trainers and welcome to the Pokemon World Championships 2016. We're coming at you live from San Francisco, California. My name is Jay Blake and I'm delighted to be joined by three-time world champion Ray Rizzo.
Jay, it's great to be here. This is our first time casting together. But the World Championships is always an incredible time of year. This is when the best of the best from all around the world come to compete this long, grueling weekend in order to try and become the very best.
I'm so excited, Ray. Like I'm literally, I can't stay in this seat. They've had to strap me down. They've had to strap me down to this chair so that I don't run around screaming at how exciting this event's going to be.
And that's exactly how the players are going to feel once they get into battle. They are going to get so excited every time maybe a little bit of good fortune comes to them. Anytime they make a great prediction, they're going to be feeling just as excited as you are.
I honestly have no idea how they must be feeling. We're building up to the first round of Swiss, and it's the first round. Everyone's got all to play for here, and so they must be going through so many different emotions. Excitement for being in this room, anxious to make sure that it goes well the first game.
You're completely right. Like, you're so excited to be here after watching that hyped opening ceremony. You're feeling just incredible, but then you're also feeling so anxious, so nervous. The nerves, I mean, your stomach is going to be feeling, you're going to be feeling it before that first round, before you actually get into a rhythm of battling. And in that round one, you just got to try and do your best until you get into that rhythm, because eventually you are going to get into that rhythm.
But speaking of getting into the rhythm and that opening ceremony, the electricity in the room was incredible, right? I mean, all the spectators watching, the announcements that were made, it was incredible.
It was great. Once Mr. Masuda walked on stage, you could hear the crowd just erupt. Everybody was so excited to see what he would reveal this time, because as we saw in the past, when he revealed Mega Kangaskhan, that became one of the best Pokemon in the format. So well, maybe Crabrawler will become the second coming of Kangaskhan.
You know what? Ever since I heard the Crabrawler little ding-ding in my head, every time a Pokemon gets knocked out, that's all that's going to be going through my head. It's like ding-ding, ding-ding. So, guys, what do you think of Crabrawler? What do you think of Pokemon Sun and Moon coming out later this year? Do you really want to see Crabrawler make it into the VGC 17? So why don't you let us know using the hashtag #PlayPokemon. You can follow us on twitter.com/Pokemon. Or if you like some sort of Pokemon merchandise images that we've got going on from Worlds, the exclusive stuff, but also just some great Pokemon stuff on Instagram.com/Pokemon. You can also check out previous events such as the US National Championships on YouTube.com/Pokemon, or go onto Facebook.com/Pokemon and give us a like and just keep up to date with all the latest Pokemon action.
Yep, and if you're so excited watching these battles live at the World Championship, make sure you use that hashtag #PlayPokemon. Let all the other fans watching this tournament what you think of each player's move, what you think of the battles, and just how much you just enjoy watching such high-level matches.
Especially seeing as we actually have the opportunity to show some of your tweets on screen as well, so the people at home will be able to see how into this you're getting. Speaking of previous events that we've had and all the excitement building up to World Championships, we actually had several different national championships being shown this year. We had several over in Europe. We had the UK National Championship, the German National Championship, and the Italian National Championship, and also US Nationals as well.
Yep.
Those events were incredible.
Yeah, we saw some really high-level matches. I had the honor to cast the U.S. Nationals, and Jay, you were casting over in Europe. So why don't we kind of walk through some of these Nationals and let people know kind of what was victorious and maybe what we might expect here this weekend. Why don't you get us started with Europe?
Well, so let's begin with the UK National Championships, which was held in Liverpool this year. A lovely event in a really nice little stadium. We had Alex Gomez taking the title. He's a Spanish player. Really, really great player. Recently graduated from the senior division, but he's just an incredible talent. And he was using a dual primal team. And he was actually known for bringing the dual primal with Bronzong team early to the regionals in Europe, but he moved away from that and took Cresselia, which had both a Thunder Wave and Icy Wind option for speed control. And it's something that we saw cropping up in other nationals in Europe as well, when people started to realize that they wanted this flexibility.
Yeah, we actually saw that at U.S. Nationals. We saw an Icy Wind and Trick Room Cresselia just to give you the kind of flexibility that you need, because Trick Room isn't always going to work out, so having Icy Wind available in case you're outside of Trick Room, it's definitely very helpful, and considering it won U.S. Nationals, it definitely shows why it's such important to have that flexibility.
Especially seeing as a lot of the restricted legendary Pokemon, the most used ones, Kyogre, Groudon, you have that same sort of speed potential.
Right.
And making sure that you manage to drop one stage of speed could win you the match.
Yeah, and it's also because their speed is kind of middling. Like, it's not super slow like a Snorlax, but it's also not really fast like a Mega Salamence. So having that flexibility really lets you take advantage of things like dual primals that have kind of that middling kind of speed.
And he played an amazing set against Ethan Hall in the final. Ethan Hall, a UK-based player who's now in day 2 as well of the World Championship, and he was using a bulky Xerneas. So obviously, early on in the season, Xerneas in that big 6 core with Groudon was mostly a timid variant, lots of speed investment, lots of special attack. But Ethan used a bulky Xerneas, more HP investment, more defense investment, to be able to survive these crucial, massive attacks from these restricted legendary Pokemon and deal back big damage with a Geomancy.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the bulky Xerneas because just being able to take so many hits and get a Geomancy up to just sweep the rest of the game. I've always been a fan of bulky Pokemon, no matter whether it's Xerneas or even other kind of forms of Pokemon. I've always liked to kind of train my Pokemon more in HP or in defenses, so I think that's definitely a trend we are likely to see here this weekend.
Of course.
A lot of bulkier variants of various Pokemon, not only Xerneas.
But speaking of the bulky Xerneas, when we moved into German National Championship, which was held in Kassel, we saw in the top cut a lot of different Xerneas, and it was an influx. In the UK National Championship, Xerneas was dropped off the map. Ethan was the only player, one of the only players in the top cut to be using Xerneas to its full potential. And then when we moved into Germany,
ensuring no two Pokemon or held items on a team can be the same, so expect to see some variety. This short video is only covering the basics. Keep watching the World Championships and check out the players demonstrating the more advanced techniques, such as speed control, predicting your opponent's next move, defensive switching, ability combos. Planning a strategic, video game championships ready team can take a lot of work, but there are fantastic resources available to help. You can test out your teams right from home using the Pokemon Global Link. When you've got a battle-tested team at the ready, head to your nearest regional championships. Get more information about tournaments at Pokemon.com/playPokemon or about Pokemon strategy at Pokemon.com/strategy. Good luck!
No longer have Professor Scott here at the desk, but always nice to hear him with that how to play video. Very helpful information, and of course we do also see some of the previous glory days of our own Aaron Zhang from that.
It's nice to relive that moment here and there.
Yeah, it's always nice to have those reminders while you're sitting here in the retirement room. All right, well, we are going to get into game very shortly. Just to add on a little bit to the video, you did see that we do have some banned Pokemon. So a lot of Pokemon are going to be allowed this year, but we will not be seeing any Pokemon like that Arceus, some other Pokemon like Manaphy, Celebi, that type of Pokemon, still not allowed in this tournament. A lot of players think that some of those would be very good. Likely they would be, and probably a little too good.
Yeah, you know, not all of them are banned because of their power, but just mainly because of accessibility. It's a lot easier to get the legendary and the restricted Pokemon that are allowed in the format currently. And of course, you are allowed to choose 2 out of that combination that we saw earlier. And so there are a couple of cores that we can talk about that have obviously dominated the circuit right from the start. And I'm really curious because I think there are, you know, potential couple of duos that can still make a big impact on the World Championships or potentially win the whole thing. When you look at the World Championships, you know, you can't just use something that people expect. You have to be able to play it really well, and I think even standard teams that look relatively standard have a lot of surprises up their sleeves. For example, at the World Championships last year, there were relatively standard looking teams, but each team had so many different things. We saw offensive Cresselia, we saw Protect Kangaskhan, you know, Assault Vest Landorus, just a whole kind of mix of Pokemon and movesets they can each use. And so, you know, each player really brings their team and has tech moves and sets and specific Pokemon too. I think when we look at Sage and Park's victory back in 2014, very few people, if any, would have expected or prepared for Mega Gyarados or Pachirisu, but those 2 Pokemon were the most important Pokemon in his team to, you know, get his victory. And so I think that even though we're probably going to see a lot of what we've been seeing in the video game, you know, in terms of just standard Pokemon, I think there are also going to be a lot of new Pokemon that players are finally bringing out and trying out. And I think we might also see some restricted duos that are a little bit more rare, but have the power to take home the title.
Yeah, let's actually take a look at the list of all of the restricted Pokemon that you will be able to bring during this tournament. Of course, these are some of the big heavy hitters of the Pokemon franchise. You know, I grew up with Mewtwo as sort of the end game, and now it's all the way over to Zygarde. So all the way from Mewtwo to Zygarde. These Pokemon, incredibly powerful. You are allowed to bring them this year, but as you can see, only 2 of these can be on your team. So we've seen a lot of them very commonly, but there are a couple of other ones here that are sort of dark horses here. Yveltal's a good one.
Yeah.
I still expect someone to be able to make Ho-Oh work. We'll see, but these Pokemon, very powerful. We'll have to see if anyone can make these other ones work.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you look at this group of 15, I think around maybe half of them have had pretty good success throughout the year. I mean, obviously, Kyogre and Groudon, they are allowed to use their primal forms, and so that's a very big deal because of their abilities and their stats. Rayquaza is a very strong Pokemon as well, and you can expect to see them mainly with Kyogre teams, but also with Xerneas and Groudon. Wouldn't be surprised to see those teams. And I think
make it through to day, if you manage to get over a certain number of CP in your region, you'll put directly into day 2. And so these are even greater players who are being added into this pool of players. So the competition is even harder.
Yeah, former national champions, former world champions like Arash are going to be in this second phase already, thanks to how much CP they've accumulated throughout the year. So it's going to be such a tough day on Saturday because you're going to have absolutely the best of the best.
And after that, you've even got the gauntlet of single elimination. You've got to make your way through all these Swiss matches, loads and loads of Pokemon action, to then get to a single elimination match, which will lead you into day 3 and the possibility of being a world champion.
Yeah, but that single elimination bracket, that's when the nerves are really starting to kick in again. I talked earlier about the beginning of the tournament before round 1, but once you get to that single elimination bracket, those nerves really start to kick up again because you cannot afford to lose a single match or else you're out.
That's the beauty of this this X2 format that we've got for day 1 and day 2, though. It means that if you pick up an early loss, maybe due to a poor matchup early on in the tournament or just a couple of mistakes here and there, you've got a bit of wriggle room.
Right, and not only that, each match is a best of 3, so you can even afford to drop a single game each match and still emerge victorious. So this is a format that really favors the players because there's so much room for error. You're bound to get unlucky in Pokemon. That's just the nature of the game.
Yep.
You're bound to get out-predicted because everybody here is so good. You're bound to run into some unfavorable matchups, but all in all, at the end of the day, the best players are going to move on. And this kind of format gives you the wiggle room to maybe drop a couple games and still advance.
And I think possibly the best thing for us is that we've got so many matches to show you. It's going to be incredible. Best of 3 each round. It's going to be a load of games for you guys to enjoy this weekend.
I love when those matches go to the 3rd game because that's when the pressure mounts. It's pretty much like the single elimination portion where this game decides it. And I just love watching those kind of matches because players have already played against each other 2 games once you get to that situation. So they already kind of know what's coming. They know how their opponents play. And you can really get into some cool mind games watching that game 3. And I just love watching those games.
Well, I mean, we've spoken a little bit about the mind games and how players get inside each other's heads and learning how to play. But if you're not familiar with the Worlds format or the Video Game Championship itself, we've actually got a short video to show you which will show you how to play and what you could do next year.
Hello, trainers! If you enjoy playing the Pokemon games and are looking for a new challenge, why not consider entering the Pokemon Video Game Championships? The Video Game Championships use a special battle format. Bring a team of 6 Pokemon, choose 4 of those for the match, and attack using 2 Pokemon at a time. That's called a double battle. Team preview is very important. This means the battle against your opponent starts before the match even begins. You know what your opponent's 6 Pokemon are, but you don't know which 4 they'll be choosing to use in the upcoming match. Choose 4 of your Pokemon carefully based on what you think your opponent might do. Get inside their head. And now the match begins. It's a 2-on-2 double battle. Half of your chosen team is immediately out in the fray. What do? Do you ask each of your 2 Pokemon to attack, to protect themselves, switch out, or to lend a helping hand to their partner? Will your opponent focus their attack on one of your Pokemon, or throw out a combo attack that targets both of your Pokemon? Whoa, didn't see that coming. In a double battle, your Pokemon's moves can target either opposing Pokemon. Some moves target both Pokemon at once. There are even attacks so powerful that they hit everyone, including your own Pokemon. However, the attacking Pokemon's partner can use its typing or abilities to avoid that damage. You can also use certain moves to help your ally. Remember this, and don't be afraid to get creative. That escalated quickly. Each turn, the fastest Pokemon to the fore will move first. It's important to keep track of how fast each Pokemon might be. Moves that inflict status conditions such as burn, paralysis, or sleep are powerful. Make sure your team has a way to deal with them, or you'll get overwhelmed. Pokemon abilities can be extremely useful in a double battle as well. Compared to the single battles you might be used to, battles in the video game championships are very fast-paced. A player could have all 4 of their Pokemon knocked out in just a few turns. Play strategically, but remember you only have 45 seconds to make a decision each turn and 15 minutes total for the entire battle. In the rare event of a match timing out, the player with the healthier team wins. Is your team strong enough to take on Arceus? What about 6 Arceus? Don't worry, you'll be safe from its judgment. The mythical Pokemon you may have received from special events cannot be used in the video game championships, but this year, most other legendary Pokemon are allowed to participate. They are known as restricted Pokemon, and only 2 Pokemon from this category are allowed in your full team of 6 Pokemon. There are also rules ensuring no 2 Pokemon or held items on a team can be the same, so expect to see some variety. This short video is only covering the basics. Keep watching the World Championships and check out the players demonstrating the more advanced techniques, such as speed control, predicting your opponent's next move, defensive switching, ability combos. Planning a strategic, video game championships ready team can take a lot of work, but there are fantastic resources available to help. You can test out your teams right from home using the Pokemon Global link. When you've got a battle-tested team at the ready, head to your nearest regional championships. Get more information about tournaments at Pokemon.com/playPokemon or about Pokemon strategy at Pokemon.com/strategy. Good luck!
Thanks, Scott. So, I mean, that video does show you the basics of how to play the Pokemon Video Game Championship Series, but one thing that we really want to just elaborate on is the skill that it comes from the players at this event and also all the players across the season that didn't make it this far.
Yeah, because so many players enter this, the series of events, but only the top few players can actually qualify for the World Championships and compete. But talking about the skill in Pokemon, it's not only battling, there's a lot of skill that goes into team building and preparing your team for events like these, because you got to consider what everybody else has been using throughout the year, what you expect to be common this tournament, which you're not going to know for sure. It's pretty much a guessing game. And you got to try and make an accurate guess on what you expect to be the most common, what you expect to face, and kind of plan your team that way. So there's just so much skill that goes into team building, let alone battling.
This is one of the things that people are quite... there's 2 sides to this story when it comes into Worlds as well, especially seeing as between day 1 of competition and day 2, you can change. You can change your team.
Right.
And so there is 2 mindsets. Do you go with something that you're comfortable with and you've been practicing with a long time for the entirety of this tournament, or do you try and shake things up and try a new team on a separate day to try and capitalize on the information that you learned in your last day of competition? Yeah,
I'm on the side of the fence where you keep the same team rather than risk things and go with a brand new team that maybe you're not as familiar with, maybe you don't have as much practice with. Yeah, you do get some extra information playing on day 1, but those aren't really the people you're playing in day 2 because a lot of that field is already predetermined thanks to the championship points those players have accumulated throughout the year. Yeah, some of the day 1 players will advance to day 2, but for the most part, that information I don't think is as important as it is playing with a team that you're very comfortable with, very familiar with, and most importantly, very confident with, and already proven that this team is good because it was enough to get you from day 1 to day 2. I think it's best to just stick with that team.
Especially when you're at the World Championships,
Right.
and there's so much on the line. Everyone is here to firstly have a good time, but secondly, with the hopes of becoming a world champion.
Yeah, there's a lot of really, really cool prizes on the line, too. And not to mention that, there's a lot of prestige on the line because becoming a world champion, I'm sure for all of these players, it's their dream, whether it was a dream from when they were a kid or even now, maybe it's still a dream to just become the very best. And all those this long, grueling tournament, all those tough matches you have to go through. Once you get to the end and emerge victorious, you feel so good about yourself because of how difficult it was. You feel so accomplished, and I think that's what all these players are going to be looking for this weekend.
Yeah, I mean, we spoke a little bit about the European players who are looking to become world champion. They're already national champions, but obviously they want to take it one step further.
Yep.
Why don't we talk a little bit about the US side of things?
Sure, so I had the pleasure to cast U.S. Nationals, and in the finals we had Chase Liebert, take the championship home over Aaron Trailer. Now, what was interesting was both of these teams that they used were so similar in kind of the core of the team. They had a Trick Room mode, they had Groudon, Xerneas, Smeargle. One of the differences was one player had Salamence, the other had Kangaskhan.
Yep.
And then we saw Chase, pretty much the linchpin of his team was the Cresselia that he brought with Icy Wind and Trick Room. It gave him the flexibility needed to take home wins over not only Aaron in the finals, but even his previous rounds, take wins over teams that were meant to counter this exact strategy that Chase was bringing, teams like Rayquaza with Kyogre, and then maybe some supporters like Crobat and Gengar. Having that one Cresselia, that one Pokemon out of 6, to just single-handedly win a whole bunch of games in the top cut elimination portion of the tournament, that just won him the tournament. That was probably his MVP, and it was just so incredible to watch Chase just masterfully play using that Cresselia, and just even in the finals we saw how much work it did.
Yeah, and I think one thing to note for everyone at home as well is that even though a lot of these Pokemon appear on a lot of teams, the way that the team is built and the way that these Pokemon have been trained can be wildly different.
They
And that's something that really informs your strategy. For example, Chase's Cresselia was a little bit more offensively inclined than some of these other Cresselia that we've been seeing, which is a very bulky Pokemon that has very big defense stats. Also, the ability to levitate means that it can support Groudon very well, but also play against Groudon quite well as well.
Exactly, because having things like Icy Wind, if you train Cresselia to be faster, you can actually become faster than Pokemon like Gengar, Crobat, known extremely fast Pokemon that now Cresselia can outspeed after a single Icy Wind. So, not to mention that, once you kind of train Cresselia to be more powerful offensively, its Psychic can just get a one-hit KO on those Pokemon, and that can single-handedly win games.
Which is how Chase managed to become US
It
National
is.
Champion.
And I'm really excited to see how he does this weekend. Maybe he's come up with something new that he feels will give maybe a standard core like that Xerneas Groudon kind of combination, and give it just one small little tweak that's enough to just put him over the top of everybody else. And that's kind of what separates the best from the very best.
Yes.
And Chase proved at U.S. Nationals that he's one of the very best players in the U.S., and he's really looking to kind of bring that momentum forward here this weekend and become a world champion.
Well, I mean, speaking of world champions and the finals last year, the world championships in Boston, we saw Shoma Hanami take it, and he used a very, we want to say generic, but it's not generic because of the way that he built the team. But he used a very classic chalk style team, which had Cresselia, Heatran, Amoonguss,
Thundurus, or not Thundurus, Landorus, Kangaskhan.
Yeah,
pretty much standard.
Yeah, exactly, and it was it looked that way on paper.
Exactly.
And as soon as you get to that finals and you're watching it, you realize that the way that he's built his team, the level of bulk that he's put into his Pokemon, it just changes the match.
Right. You can have the same 6 Pokemon that everybody expects, that a lot of other players are using, but the way you train your Pokemon, the moves you give them, the items you give them, that can just differentiate the Pokemon from all the others so heavily.
Yes.
And that's exactly what Shoma did last year. I'm so excited to see what he does this year, because he's a player who has done very well in the past at Japan Nationals, but that was his first year actually making it to the World Championships. So now that he's a veteran of the World Championships, he's already won a world championship. I'm really excited to see what he does in the second year. Maybe he can win 2 in a row.
Yeah, that would be incredible. I mean, speaking of the difference between last year and this year, obviously one of the main things that you can bring 2 restricted legendary Pokemon with you, but there are several Pokemon that still are out of format. So we can see that the mythical legendary or the mythical Pokemon that can't be used are on your screen right now. So this includes some really popular Pokemon such as Darkrai, Volcanion, and Mew. But, I mean, Darkrai can't be used, but its popular Dark Void attack can.
Yeah, Darkrai can't be used, but boy, its special move Dark Void can still be used, because we see Smeargle so frequently, and just being able to put both Pokemon to sleep with a single move, it's just so game-breaking. And Smeargle, maybe its stats aren't as good as other Pokemon, but the ability to learn any move in the game just separates it from everything else.
Yeah, for diversity, especially when up against these restricted legendary Pokemon, which may have quite middling move speed potential, like you said, Ray. You can put them both to sleep. You can put the opposite side of, and it just gives you turns to be able to do damage to these big Pokemon that you can see on your screen right now. Obviously, we've got the popular primal Pokemon, Kyogre and Groudon, Rayquaza, Xerneas, which are mainstays in VGC 16 currently. But you've also got some other more niche picks.
Yep, Pokemon like Yveltal, we've seen it has had success in the past, most notably by Arash. So I'm excited to see how it does this weekend. It's maybe not as common, especially because it just straight up loses to Xerneas, which is everywhere. But maybe if players are able to put together an Evoltal team that just counters Xerneas so hard, maybe it could actually see some use.
Well, as you said, Arash managed to make it happen.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously he's a very skilled player, but I'm sure other people have seen the potential that Evoltal provides to them. But I think one of the most key things to think about when building a team like this is you're not just bringing one restricted legendary Pokemon, you're bringing two. So you need to be able to pair them together.
Right, you got to form a core, and when you're using restricted Pokemon that are just so powerful, you want them to kind of fit well together. You want them to cover each other's weaknesses, and the most popular core we've seen throughout this year has been Primal Groudon with Xerneas, and they do that absolutely perfectly. Xerneas weak to steel types, pretty much only steel types, poison types too, but you don't really see them too much, and usually their defenses aren't as good.
Or if they've got Levitate like Gengar.
Or if they have Levitate, but Groudon can just take advantage of those steel types and those poison types, unless of course they're Levitating like a Gengar or a Crobat, but because of just how powerful Groudon is with its fire moves, it can still hit them so hard. So Groudon's coverage for Xerneas' weakness is absolutely perfect. So that's why they go together so well. And because of Groudon's just really high attack, usually you don't want to just leave it firing off Precipice Blades over and over, so you want to take it out quickly, but that gives Xerneas room to just set up Geomancies, and that can just spell the end of the game right there. So you really need to focus down both of them. You can't just focus on one or the other, and that's just what makes it so tough and why that core has been the most popular and arguably the most successful to date.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things to bear in mind, though, is that for the World Championship, is it the play? Because it's been the most popular all year. Do you stick with the Xerneas Groudon core and take it through to the World Championships? Or do you think, oh, everyone's going to be bringing that, I need to find a way to beat
No,
it?
that's exactly what all of these players are wondering, because we saw last year, you mentioned Chalk, the core kind of Kangaskhan, Cresselia, Landorus, Heatran, the normal kind of Pokemon that you just saw over and over and over. Yeah, in the top 8 at Worlds, it was almost entirely those types of teams. So even though everybody saw it coming, it still won. And it was more how you differentiated that with moves, with items, maybe how you trained them. That's kind of what set you apart. And maybe that's what we see this year if Xerneas Groudon cores are to, again, just dominate. Maybe it's just one specific Pokemon as a tech choice, maybe to counter a few specific Pokemon choices, maybe how you train your Xerneas, how you train your Groudon, maybe what kind of moves you give all your various Pokemon. That could just set you apart, and then you could still win with kind of a standardish team, but just have that kind of flexibility to use these kind of unpredicted moves. But
well, I mean, this is the thing that US Nationals and Japan Nationals showed us, is that a lot of people were pinning their hopes on Bronzong.
Yeah, Bronzong, extremely, extremely common. And we actually saw at US Nationals, a player did try Imprison to kind of counter all those other Bronzongs. Maybe that makes a return this weekend. It is kind of risky, but I mean, if you get Imprison up and you just completely lock down the opponent's Bronzong, prevent them from using a Gyro Ball, a Trick Room, Hypnosis, Gravity, Skill Swap, a whole bunch of moves you can prevent them from using. And that can just single-handedly just win the game. If their Bronzong just can't do anything, it's suddenly a 3 versus 4.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the most important things to note about that move choice, is that it doesn't just lock out speed control in the form of Trick Room, but also in like supporting moves in Skill Swap. But the Gyro Ball is the mainstay of why people are using Bronzong, because it does a lot of damage to Xerneas, especially if it gets a Geomancy boost up.
Oh yeah, it does so much damage. Bronzong may not be the most powerful Pokemon, but Gyro Ball, since it's based on speed, how much faster the opponent's Pokemon is versus yours, Bronzong, a very slow Pokemon, but after that Geomancy, Xerneas becomes incredibly fast. Gyro Ball just does massive damage to it, and it's super effective. So even though Bronzong, maybe his attack isn't that high, Gyro Ball just does massive damage. It's enough anyway.
Yeah.
And like you were saying with Imprison, if you imprison that Gyro Ball and you have a Xerneas on your own team, now suddenly you don't have to worry about Bronzong at all, because usually on those types of teams, Bronzong and Groudon are about all that really counters Xerneas. So if you can imprison to lock down a Gyro Ball from the opposing Bronzong, now suddenly your Xerneas has one less threat to worry about.
Exactly. But we spoke a little bit about how important Bronzong was to Japan Nationals, and maybe you guys at home haven't seen what happened at Japan Nationals. We can tell you a little bit about the champions team. Hideo Kotake, he actually used a really different restricted legendary pair, didn't he, Ray?
He did, and it's one we didn't see on that list earlier, but one that I think might have some potential this weekend. It's not one we've seen throughout the year very frequently, but the Rayquaza Groudon combination is what took home Japan Nationals, and I actually think this kind of core has a lot of potential, and one of the reasons is because of Mega Rayquaza. It kind of opens up some flexibility for your non-restricted Pokemon. So Groudon, probably the best restricted Pokemon in the format. So you have that in the core, you have that on your team, but now Rayquaza can shut down the sunlight on opposing Groudons, and then maybe in some of your non-restricted choices, maybe go for a water type, maybe like a Rotom Wash and a Azumarill. We've seen Pokemon like Suicune. There's a number of water types you could choose from.
Yeah.
And then they can shut down Groudon, or maybe even like a Thundurus with a Hidden Power Water. Anything
seen
with a
so
water
many.
move that can shut down Groudon from a non-restricted Pokemon, that can just turn the tides of battle, because when you're using a non-restricted Pokemon that maybe players don't expect as much, don't have as much practice against to shut down a Groudon, now you've got your Rayquaza and Primal Groudon against only one restricted Pokemon. So I really like the idea of the team. We've seen how successful it was in Japan.
Yep.
I'm excited to see it this weekend. I think Mega Rayquaza isn't as powerful as maybe Xerneas or Groudon or Kyogre, simply because of the weaknesses it has. It doesn't have any moves that hit both opponents' Pokemon.
Yep.
But that kind of flexibility it gives you with your non-restricted Pokemon, I really like that, and I do think it has potential when combined with the Groudon. I think when it's paired with Kyogre or Xerneas, it's not as consistent. But I think when you pair it with that Groudon, you give yourself a lot more flexibility, and I just love that in Worlds because it's a best of 3. You're playing so many matches. You need that flexibility when you're playing against such great players, and you're playing against them multiple times. So that's why I like that core, and why I think maybe we can see it do well this weekend. I don't know how many people are using it, but we'll see.
I guess that's the thing. We've got to wait and see what's going to happen. But this has been possibly a very aggressive format. These restricted legendary Pokemon have very high attack, special attack, also lots of bulk, so there's lots of big damage being thrown around. And as you mentioned, Ray, having the Mega Rayquaza be able to open up the potential for your non-restricted partners to be able to get big damage off as well, especially against Groudon being so important to this format, it makes a lot of difference. But a Pokemon which does a lot of damage which isn't restricted, that made a return to Hideo Kotake's team, is Talonflame. And Talonflame is a Pokemon that was very popular at the beginning of the format. It was one of the big 6 core alongside the Groudon Xerneas. And it made a return, but in a slightly different way. He used only 3 moves on his Talonflame.
Yeah, he went with a Choice Band moveset for Talonflame, and Talonflame really only has 2 powerful attacks in Flare Blitz and Brave Bird. So he was thinking, maybe what could his third move be? Well, there's sleep everywhere. Smeargles, Amoonguss, Jumpluff even, Bronzong. Maybe Sleep Talk.
Yep.
And so then if he gets put to sleep, he can still attack.
Yes.
But then maybe you're wondering, why doesn't he have a 4th move? Well, that just lowers the odds of you picking one of these really powerful moves like Brave Bird or Flare Blitz. If you would have given it maybe like Giga Impact or U-Turn or who knows what other move, then sometimes you're actually going to be picking that move when it's much more reliable to pick Brave Bird or Flare Blitz. And using only 3 moves with Sleep Talk gives you better odds when you are put to sleep. And it's not like Talonflame has a huge move pool where there's something it just really wishes it had. It really only needs Brave Bird and Flare Blitz.
It's true. And I think a lot of people have shown that the power of Brave Bird, especially with the ability Gale Wings giving it priority, can really set up a lot of Pokemon for key knockouts.
Yeah, I don't want to praise Talonflame too much because he's not one of my favorite Pokemon. I think his defenses are just so low, and he gets knocked out so easily. He does so much recoil to himself. But in this format, I think this is actually the best he ever has been, and maybe ever will be, because he's a non-restricted Pokemon. So he can deal massive damage to Pokemon, maybe with lower defenses like a Xerneas or a Kyogre or a Rayquaza. And maybe it doesn't get the full knockout, but it puts it into range for another Pokemon to pick up the knockout. And yeah, maybe Talonflame will go down easily after it uses 1 attack, but if it can trade itself for most of a restricted Pokemon, that can sometimes be worth it.
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of a glass cannon when you think about it in that respect, but it does have a lot of interesting tricks up its sleeve alongside the Tailwind boosted by Gale Wings. You've got that Brave Bird dealing massive damage, and early in the format it was used to try and deal with Ferrothorn, which was a bit of a thorn in the side, pun intended, for Primal Kyogre.
Yeah, and another thing that we have seen it use a little bit is Will-O-Wisp, because Kangaskhan, Salamence, they're everywhere. So being able to burn Pokemon is certainly helpful. However, Groudon, the most powerful physical attacker in the format, is a fire type, so it can't be burned. So that is one downside of Will-O-Wisp this format. We've seen it in the past formats a lot, but this format, when your biggest physical attacker is a fire type, it just becomes a little bit weaker of a move.
Yeah, and that's one of the main differences that we've seen from this format to the previous year. Previous year, Will-O-Wisp and moves that burn other Pokemon to lower their attack stats have been really popular, but now it's kind of shifted towards sleep. And sleep
let a win get to your head. You cannot let a loss get to your head. And I think it's good to be confident, to reflect on each round as it happens. But, you know, having been in that position before,
Primal Kyogre uses a special attack instead of its physical attack. It's only really Kangaskhan and sometimes the odd Landorus that you really want to be hitting with those Will-O-Wisps.
Yeah, because even Salamence, even though it gets Double Edge, which is extremely powerful, you do see Hyper Voice a lot on it, so it does have alternatives, even if it does get burned. And I think players this format, they haven't really preferred Burn. They've more shifted to Intimidate. Now, we see Intimidate every year, but this year, since Salamence is already so good, and you don't really want to have both Intimidate and Burn, it's kind of overkill. You really only need the Intimidate. So even though Intimidate is just so good, I think players are happy just settling for only one Intimidator, no burns, and just relying on Sleep instead to set up these restricted Pokemon.
And I think one thing to bear in mind as well is, as you mentioned, that Hyper Voice attack from Salamence, it hits 2 Pokemon at the same time. And, okay, so if you want to be able to put your opponent's restricted Pokemon to sleep, and you want to be able to block moves that hit both Pokemon at the same time, I wonder which Pokemon could offer you both of those moves in one package.
And that's Smeargle.
That is Smeargle.
Pokemon you're never really happy to see as a player because of just all the things that can go wrong as soon as it comes out.
So many
not
mind games.
Not only Dark Void and all the mind games that go on, whether it's going to use like Crafty Shield, Wide Guard, Quick Guard, Follow Me. It has so many things it can do that are actually good.
Yes.
But then that's not even taking into account its ability. Moody, which can raise 1 stat 2 stages and then drop another stat 1 stage, and it's completely random.
Yes.
So you can't prepare for it. You never know what's going to happen. Maybe it'll raise its speed 2 stages and then it'll be faster than all of your Pokemon and just put them to sleep before they can move. Maybe it'll be evasion that raises, and so now you can't hit it. Or maybe it just won't do anything. It'll be like a special attack boost, and you'll be kicking yourself wondering, oh, I wish I just had a better ability.
There's just so many shenanigans that Smeargle offers.
Yeah.
And I think one thing that is important is that for you guys at home to know what the environment for Smeargle has been. So let's take a look on the PGL and see what Smeargle has been using leading up to the World Championships. So just going to quickly grab Smeargle from you guys. But Ray, what sort of set do you like to see on Smeargle?
That's a tough question just because of how much it can do, but I really, of course, Dark Void, you have to go with Dark Void. I also really like Crafty Shield. Since you're expecting a lot of sleep from the likes of Bronzong, Smeargle, maybe a Moongus, I think Crafty Shield gives you an ability to counter that. But now that it's just so expected, maybe now you can start to drop Crafty Shield. As we see here, it's kind of slipped down here to 7th place in the rankings for moves. So maybe players, now that they're just kind of expecting Smeargle to Crafty Shield, that just kind of makes Crafty Shield itself less useful.
Yes, and I mean, as we said, so many different options and so many different ways that Smeargle can support your team. And seeing in 2nd place, you've got that Spiky Shield option, which, if you going up against a Kangaskhan on the first turn, you can drop that Spiky Shield, and if they go to target Smeargle to avoid a Dark Void, then they're going to be taking a little bit of damage as well, and every little helps. Yeah,
it's basically a better protect in that it can do damage if you use contact move against it, and if it's a Kangaskhan, you can take a whole lot of damage from it. So it's basically just a completely better protect. One of the alternatives that you do see down at the bottom is King Shield. The downside with using King Shield instead of Spiky Shield is you can still be affected by moves that don't do damage. So the likes of Dark Void, Taunt, you can still be affected if you go for King Shield. So a lot of players prefer that Spiky Shield to King Shield, even though that attack drop can definitely be useful against the likes of Groudon. Maybe if it goes for a Fire Punch on Smeargle, it's definitely still good against the likes of Kangaskhan dropping its attack. But Spiky Shield is just more consistent, more reliable, and as you can see by the statistics, that's exactly what a lot of the competitors are preferring.
One proper little mention towards the bottom here, we've got Feint. And Feint is a very interesting attack, extremely high priority bracket, does quite a small amount of damage, but breaks Protect.
Yeah, very useful when you've got such powerful Pokemon like Rayquaza, Groudon. A lot of times when you're against them, you want to protect. Xerneas is a little different because you don't want to protect against that because then you just give it room to Geomance.
Exactly.
But against the likes of Groudon, Rayquaza, maybe you do start to feel like maybe you're a little safer than against a Xerneas. You can afford to protect. Now those Pokemon do sometimes use Sword Stance, so it is still risky. That's kind of why we see Feint so low, because people are still very unlikely to protect against the likes of Groudon or Rayquaza. But it's still a good move. It's just Smeargle learns so many good moves. You've got to drop something. Feint is just too situational. And so even though it's a very good move,
we saw a couple of Feint Smeargle actually being used in Italian nationals, and I think the key here is that it was such a surprising move to see. And obviously, because Smeargle was running mostly 4 support moves that don't do any damage, this one tech can really swing the match in your favor if it takes away a restricted legendary from your opponent.
Right, and Rayquaza does carry Focus Sash a lot, so being able to get that one last hit on it, maybe either to break the Focus Sash, or if it's already gotten down to that 1 HP from the Focus Sash, actually being able to do damage with Smeargle is definitely still useful. If it gets taunted, it can still do something, even though, of course, the opponent simply doesn't protect, then Feint is only just going to be doing a small amount of damage. It won't actually be accomplishing much of anything, but still, it gives you a little bit of room for flexibility, a couple more options. So it's certainly a viable move, but I personally prefer some of these other more common moves that we see.
More multifunctional.
Right. One of my favorite moves, it might not be the best on Smeargle because it's so inconsistent, but it can break the game wide open, and that's Transform. We see it down in 6th place. Very common still at 30%, but this move, if you get a Geomancy up with Xerneas, get those stat boosts, and then have Smeargle transform into that, you actually get those stat boosts too on that copied Xerneas. So now you've got 2 Geomancy Xerneas.
Sounds delicious, doesn't it?
It pretty much gives you a way to use 3 restricted Pokemon when you're really only allowed to use 2. And that's what I like so much about Transform. It's such a fun move, but it is risky because, you know, you're spending a turn not doing anything, just copying.
Yes.
So you can get knocked out, and you don't copy the Pokemon's HP, so you're still stuck with Smeargle's low HP stat after the transformation. So it is a bit of a riskier move, but it's such a fun move to use, and I personally love it. I don't know if it would make it onto, if I were competing in Worlds and using a Smeargle, I don't know if Transform would make it into those 4 moves, but it's certainly a fun move, and I love seeing players use Transform on Smeargle.
But when you're the trainer with 2 Geomancy Xerneas on your side of the field, I think you feel pretty confident in your abilities, right?
Oh yeah, there's almost no way you can lose from there because it's such an overbearing combination. Regardless, even if you have 2 steel types out, even then you could get knocked out by both Xerneas. So it's such a powerful move that can single-handedly win you the game, but it's just so risky.
And this is why we've seen early in the format, but still going into the World Championships, Xerneas and Smeargle are a really good combination together. And early in the format, we had a lot of Smeargle who would be using Focus Sash to be able to redirect an attack, or maybe use Fake Out on the first turn to allow Xerneas to set up a Geomancy, and maybe with a lucky Moody boost afterwards, get some speed up and drop a Dark Void and just start knocking out Pokemon.
Yeah, but now we've seen kind of a trend. We've seen a lot of different things. We have seen the Smeargles that do prefer the Focus Sash and train to be extremely fast, but then you also see Smeargles that train to be extremely slow. So Smeargle's slower than the normal Trick Room sweepers like Kyogre and Groudon. So if you do train it to be slower than them, that means in Trick Room, it acts as a counter to those teams. So you can Dark Void to put them to sleep before they can even move in their own Trick Room. So that can, you know, that's really, really good, and it gives you kind of something that's unexpected. It's just at this point, it starts to become expected now that a lot of players have begun trying that. At the time it first started popping up, it was so unexpected. Nobody saw the slow Smeargle coming. But now at Worlds, you got the best players. Everybody's going to see it coming. They're going to expect it. And since it's a best of 3, you're going to find out.
Yes, of course. And I think one of the things that we should let you know about previous World Championships, if you haven't been watching before, is that usually throughout the season, it seems to be a trend where the very beginning will be extremely aggressive. Everything's very fast. Everything does insane amounts of damage. And once you get to the World Championship, everyone values bulk. And having moves, or basically having Pokemon that will be able to survive key moves over being able to do massive damage very quickly. Because you've got so many different matches to play. It's best of 3. You want to make sure that you understand your opponent's playstyle.
Right.
And having very big, bulky Pokemon will make sure that happens.
Yeah, it gives you more options to switch in, switch out by having more bulk. So maybe even if you switch in on a resisted attack, if you're not that bulky, you know, you could take over half your HP regardless of if you resist it or not. So I personally really value that bulk. I've always, at Worlds, I've always trained my Pokemon to be very bulky.
Yes.
The only thing is in this format, I don't know if we'll see that as much. It's still just naturally a very aggressive format because we have these big, powerful, restricted Pokemon. Some of them we'll see kind of bulky, the likes of Xerneas, maybe Groudon. Kyogre, I think we'll definitely see a bulkier version of Kyogre.
Yep.
But as for the non-restricted Pokemon, they just get knocked out too easily by these restricted Pokemon. It doesn't really matter as much if you train them to be bulky. So like a Salamence, you don't expect to see a bulky Salamence.
No.
Kangaskhan, in past years, you did see bulky Kangaskhan a lot, but this year I don't expect to see that nearly as much.
Yeah.
Smeargle can be bulky, but of course Smeargle can only get so bulky. But a lot of players have been training it bulky, so that it can maybe take a Kangaskhan Double Edge.
Yep.
Maybe after some Moody Boost, it can start to take some of these restricted Pokemon attacks. But again, it's a Smeargle, so even though we say trained bulky, it's still not actually bulky.
Well, I mean, Joshua Lawsey might disagree with you. At US Nationals, there's a really great photo around of Joshua seeing a Smeargle survive I think it was a Groudon attack. And he didn't notice that the Moody boosts have picked up a defense boost, and Smeargle just stayed around, put him to sleep. It was insane.
Yeah, you really got to keep track of those Moody boosts. If Smeargle's been out for maybe like 5, 6, 7 turns, you start to forget because you're focusing on so many other, I don't want to say more important because eventually that does become important, but you're focusing on out-predicting the opponent. You're focusing on more immediate things that you start to lose track of these Moody boosts. So it's really, really important to be at the height of your mental game in these tournaments and be able to keep track of those Moody boosts. Of course, players they're used to keeping track of things like Trick Room, but then also Moody, you're not really so used to it, but this year you have to be.
I think this is one of the VGC 16 takeaways we've mentioned before, but it's definitely an important thing to bear in mind when you're watching at home. These unrestricted Pokemon, these non-restricted legendary Pokemon are great, but it's the support cast that really define how your team works, and this is why Smeargle is so popular.
It really is, because Smeargle, its defenses are so low. But then you look at Pokemon, maybe like Salamence, its defenses are actually pretty good, but it's still getting knocked out in one hit from a Xerneas or a Kyogre. So does it really matter? You might as well just take that kind of support role. Salamence used a lot because of its Intimidate. If it didn't have Intimidate, I don't think it would be seen nearly as much. So even Salamence, like, it's so good offensively, but it's become more of a support Pokemon. Smeargle, of course, the quintessential support Pokemon because it can learn any move. Kangaskhan is probably the only, maybe I don't want to say only, one of the few restricted Pokemon that can really sweep an entire team and just be such a presence offensively because of that power-up punch and because of its ability.
Yes.
But most other non-restricted Pokemon that we see are primarily support.
Yes. And I mean, it's an extreme difference in bulk, extreme difference in power, but the ability to distract the eye of your opponent and make them have to worry about what's going to happen. Your opponent will be in a position where they'll be like, okay, if I bear down on this restricted legendary Pokemon, I can knock it out early. But if there's a Protect and the support Pokemon on the side does something that will change the field, maybe add a Tailwind in or drop a Dark Void, it could be lights out for you.
It can. Things like Tailwind, any kind of speed control, things like Thunder Wave as well. Of course, things like Dark Void, Sleep Powder, Spore. And then not only that, you have moves like Follow Me and Rage Power, which can just not even pretending to be a distraction, like you were saying. You can force your Pokemon to become a distraction with the likes of Follow Me and Rage Powder, and that can alone be enough to support your Xerneas or Groudon to get set up in a position to sweep, just output massive damage. And, I mean, there's so many options for these non-restricted Pokemon. That's what I personally love most about this format. The restricted Pokemon, yeah, there's not a whole lot of variety there. But in those non-restricted Pokemon, there's so much creativity, so many things you can do with them.
Yes.
And even things that we hardly ever see. We'll probably see things this weekend that we have yet to see this entire year, and I'm so excited for that.
Ray, you've got me so excited. They're going to have to loosen these straps or something. It's ridiculous. But, guys, we're going to kick it to a short break now. But don't go anywhere. We're back with some great VGC action for you shortly.